What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I would like to welcome you all to another edition of Wayne's Perspective, where we operate in discipline, decency, integrity, and respect. And I'm coming through with another video just for you. Before I get started, I hope everyone is doing okay out there, taking every day one day at a time, living life the best way you know how. As for me, y'all know how I do. I'm doing okay. Can't complain too much. I'm also taking every day one day at a time and living life the best way I know how as well. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's video. But first, just a couple of things. Initially, I did not plan to do this video, but after thinking about it for a little bit, as well as listening to a lot of content on today, April 30th, 2025, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and share my thoughts with the world and get it out there. And if you're a wrestling fan such as myself, I think you'll welcome my thoughts on this topic that we're going to be talking about today. And one more thing before I do get started with the video, I want to give a shout out to the following content creators whose channels I've been listening to for the past several months when it comes to wrestling related content. BC Amplified, CJax525, Nate Know It All, The Hater, Over the Top with Wizard, and pardon me if I mispronounced that, Joe Cronin, Voices of Wrestling, and I also got to include Vince Russo and Jonathan Coachman. Even though I don't wear any hats, I take my hats off to these men because, like I said a few moments ago, I've been listening to these men for the last several months talk about wrestling. And now when I think about it, their videos for the most part is what led me to doing this video on today. And on that note, we're going to get into today's video. So again, if you're a longtime wrestling fan such as myself, grab your gummy bears, grab your snacks, grab whatever you need because I got a lot of thoughts I'm going to share with everyone. And as you can tell by the title, you already know what this is about. Let's talk about Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Mr. Paul Levesque, the Chief Content Officer of WWE. First things first, I've been a wrestling fan since the age of 5. However, I'm not going to talk about that on this video today, mainly because I already did a video talking about my time as a wrestling fan. And if you do go back into my archives, be sure to check out that post. And I believe the title of it is My Life as a Wrestling Fan. Either way, it's in my archives. Check that out. I've been a fan of Triple H since 1995 when he made his initial debut in the WWF. From 95 to 96, and then when 97 arrived and Generation X came, as well as 1998 and 1999, which is when he declared that he wanted to become WWF champion, I was on board. I followed this man's career since he stepped foot in the company. Is it safe to say that I know all about him? It's possible, but I've always been a fan. And let me zone in on his absolute prime, which would be November 1999 all the way up to May 2001. As most longtime wrestling fans know, it was in November 1999 when he quote unquote married Stephanie and took her away from Tess. Rest in peace to Andrew Martin, by the way. That right there, along with the booking of Triple H at the time, he was a monster heel. He was the biggest heel in the business. And he ended 1999 on a strong note. Y'all remember that long match he had against Vince McMahon at Armageddon 1999. And that's when Stephanie McMahon turned heel and joined Triple H. We all remember that. So then that takes us into the year 2000, which it was his year. I look back on that year fondly. Definitely one of my favorite years in wrestling history. Probably number 3 or number 4 on the list. But that was his year, and I would say The Rock was 1A. If Triple H was number 1 in 2000, The Rock was 1A. And let's go down the list. He has some classics that year, and let's focus on pay-per-view for right now. The match against Cactus Jack at the 2000 Royal Rumble, 5-star classic. That's in my top 10 favorite matches as well. Then we go to No Way Out 2000. He had that Hell in a Cell match against Cactus Jack, which retired Mick Foley at the time after 15 years. That was a great match. I do want to focus on WrestleMania 2000 just for a small moment. Looking back, I think we all can say with certainty that the main event of that show, with all due respect to Mick Foley and with all due respect to the Big Show, that match should have been The Rock versus Triple H one-on-one. That should have been the main event. Instead, we got that main event at Backlash 2000 the next month, which was a way better show than WrestleMania 2000. That was another excellent match with Triple H and The Rock, and we had all of the interference. Austin came back, helped Rock win the title. It was great. And by the way, that Hell in a Cell match with Cactus Jack and No Way Out, I do give that 5 stars. The match against The Rock at Backlash, I think I give that 4.5 stars. And we go to Judgment Day 2000. They had an awesome Iron Man match for the WWF title, which saw Triple H regain the title, even though the finish was controversial. I think I give that match 4.75 stars, but again, it was excellent. I'm going to skip over the King of the Ring. Well, no, let me go back to King of the Ring. Y'all remember King of the Ring 2000 when it was a 6-man tag? It was Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon, and Triple H teaming against The Rock, Undertaker, and Kane. And the winner of the match, for example, if somebody from The Rock's team pinned somebody on Triple H's team, Triple H will lose the WWF title. And that's what happened because The Rock pinned Vince to regain the WWF title. I look back on that and I say, instead of them doing the 6-man tag, they should have just did a fatal 4-way match, but one fall to a finish. Rock, Triple H, Kane, and The Undertaker. It would have been a way better match. Plus, we still could have done the interference from Vince and Shane. You still would have had the same Undertaker bump when he choke slammed Shane McMahon through the table. I'm sure most of y'all probably don't remember that, but I do remember that bump. And that was on one of the SmackDown games too for PlayStation. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. And we go to Fully Loaded 2000. That was the last man standing match against Chris Jericho. An excellent match. I think I give that one 4.25 stars or something like that. But that was one of the best last man standing matches ever. I'm going to skip over SummerSlam. I'm going to skip over Unforgiven. Well, as a matter of fact, the Unforgiven 2000 match, that was against Kurt Angle. That should have been way better than what it was, but it was just merely okay. Then we get to No Mercy 2000. He had an excellent match against Chris Benoit. We skip over November, we skip over December, and then we go into January 2001. He had a WWF title match against Kurt Angle at the 2001 Royal Rumble. It was a pretty good match, better than that match from Unforgiven the previous year, but that's not saying much. Then we head right into No Way Out 2001. The 3 Stages of Hell match against Steve Austin, another one of my top 10 favorite matches of all time, a 5-star classic, definitely a great match. Then we head into WrestleMania 17, still the greatest pay-per-view of all time and the greatest WrestleMania of all time. He had an excellent match with The Undertaker, one that I give 4 stars. I'm going to skip over Backlash. That's when the 2-man power trip was in effect. Him and Steve Austin, they defeated Kane and The Undertaker to win the WWF Tag Team titles. Then we get to the night after Judgment Day 2001. Him and Steve Austin on Raw had that excellent match against Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. 4.25 stars for that one. That was one of the best matches in Raw history, where Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho won the big one. And that was also the match when Triple H tore his quad. And speaking of which, one thing that I always admired about Triple H was his toughness. You can't take that away from him. And it was in that match, even though he had that horrible injury, he still finished the match. And I also think about Survivor Series 2002, that first ever Elimination Chamber match, when I believe there was a spot when Rob Van Dam was going to do the 5-star frog splash or some type of splash off of one of the chamber pods, but he landed straight on Triple H's throat. And Triple H was out for, I think he was out for like a couple of weeks because of that. And they had to get him to the hospital after the show. But the fact that he finished the match with an injury like that, dude could barely breathe. And quite frankly, you don't see no toughness like that in wrestlers of today. I'm just saying. So again, going from there, he's had other classics years down the road. We know of the 2 classic matches against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 27 and WrestleMania 28. You know, the list goes on and on. But like I said, he did his thing as a wrestler. And did he deserve a spot in the Hall of Fame? Yes. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit towards the end as well. So like I said, great wrestler, great in-ring performer. He did his thing. Now let me move on to the next aspect. I remember a guy telling me a few years back that the only reason why Triple H married Stephanie McMahon was he made a business decision. And that's not to say that Triple H doesn't love Stephanie. I mean, they've been married for 20-something years and they have 3 kids. I'm sure that the love is genuine, but what my friend at the time was telling me about the business thing, he knew that if he married the boss's daughter, that was going to open up a wide door of backstage opportunities, and everything else that came along with it because you're part of the family on both ends. It was no surprise to me at the time that when he married Stephanie, that he was going to start gaining creative influence behind the scenes. And even then, when that started happening, I was like, oh boy, because you knew just at the back of your mind that with him married into the family, stuff like this was going to happen. So anytime people started talking about Triple H taking over one day and he's going to do this and he's going to do that, I was never on board with that because I always viewed him as a wrestler. I never viewed him as a creative mastermind. He's not a creative mastermind. And speaking of creativity, the key C word here, that's going to take me to my next point, which is NXT. I remember people talking about NXT a lot back in the day during this prime. I do recall hearing that the late Dusty Rhodes, rest in peace, and I can't think of the other people's name, but they were doing the real creative work, and Triple H was pretty much in the Vince McMahon role, overseeing everything. And there was a point in the mid 2010s when NXT would have awesome takeover shows, and then everybody would be talking about it so much that you would be wondering if WrestleMania, as an example, would be able to follow up and best that. I mean, it was real, and I watched a lot of those takeover episodes, and they were great. The roster was great, the matches were pretty good, the flow of everything was nice. It really did feel like a cultural phenomenon, and you can also say that it kind of gave birth to AEW because a lot of the cats that we saw wrestling on NXT during these peak years, they're still in AEW right now, or some may still be in AEW and others may have came back to the WWE. But needless to say, the product was hot. There was no denying that. With hindsight being 2020, doing NXT was not going to translate to anything on the main roster. And what I mean by that is just because you had a good handle on what was going on in NXT, it was not going to be the same thing as handling the main roster. Yes, it's still wrestling, but one is considered developmental and then the other one is considered the main roster. But we all know that. So again, NXT, it had its moments, but even it was still at this point where I was like, okay, I wasn't on this whole thing about, okay, Triple H is cooking, Triple H is cooking. I wasn't on it like that. It was a good product for the time. And even then, I recall some other people saying that this was a stepping stone to him getting into the position that he's in now. And quite frankly, that may be true. Getting to my next point, let's talk about TKO. I remember where I was when I first heard the news that the company was being sold to TKO. I remember the press release, and I believe this press release came from Dave Meltzer, if my memory serves me correctly, saying that Vince McMahon, he was going to remain on the board of directors as the executive vice president, but Triple H would be quote unquote knighted as the chief content officer. I remember seeing that. That's why I say that whole thing about being knighted as the head of creative, that's where that came from. Vince McMahon was no longer going to have any say on creative matters. And speaking of which, let me talk about Vince McMahon right quick, because he's been trending as of late when it comes to certain things that were said during WrestleMania weekend, specifically from Triple H and even John Cena and a few other people. Vince McMahon is not perfect. I think we all know that. There's been some questionable things that have happened over the years as it relates to Vince McMahon. However, we do notice that there is a key difference between what we see now and what we were seeing under Vince McMahon's leadership. And I'm talking about just a structure as the company. You know what I'm saying? That right there is a key difference. I'm not talking about the creative aspect because, yes, Vince McMahon, under his creative vision, there were successes and there were failures. Nobody is going to sit right here and say that everything that Vince McMahon approved was great, because it wasn't. You would be kidding yourself if you believe that's the case. What I'm saying is that I was never on that whole train that Vince McMahon needed to go or the company was going to do better without him in charge. Wrestling was on its deathbed until Triple H became head of creative. I was never in that thought process. But the point that I'm making is that there were noticeable differences under Vince McMahon's leadership as opposed to the TKO leadership. And right now it's all coming out that maybe this was not such a good move after all. And I also found out that one of the reasons why they sold the company to TKO was because The company itself was getting bigger, so they need to do something. It could not hold itself or maintain itself as being a family-owned company. Even with them still being traded on Wall Street and things like that, they had to do something. Now, a lot of people would say that that was a good move. A lot of people would say that that was not a good move. And I think with hindsight being 2020 already, they should have kept it in the family, because without the TKO influence, I don't think we would be seeing some of the stuff that we're seeing today. And that's real talk. Now, getting back to the topic at hand, which is Triple H, I was never on board with this guy being the head of creative or being in any kind of backstage role that had direct influence on what we see on TV. I just never was a part of that. I did not see where anybody was getting this notion that things would be better under Triple H. Okay, NXT is one thing, but just because he did his thing under NXT along with other creative minds doesn't mean that that same thing was going to translate to the main roster. And I said that already, and I wanted to say it again to make this point. And speaking of making points, let me also make another point as I continue on. Remember the 2014 Rumble, which is a sour spot for most of us, and how horrible that Royal Rumble was because Batista came back and won. Hindsight being 2020 once again, if there was anybody who should have won that Rumble that night, it was Daniel Bryan. But of course, they pulled the rug from under us, and Batista pretty much came out of left field and won the match. And that's no shade on Batista, because I like Batista. Batista got some classics in my view. I was always a fan, so that's no shade at him. I'm bringing this up because that's going to take me into the trolling aspect. And I'm sure most of us who were watching at the time, y'all remember the night after the 2014 Royal Rumble when him and Stephanie came out, and one of the first things out this guy's mouth was, "Oh, you didn't get what you wanted." Oh man, kayfabe wise, I was pissed because it's clear what he was talking about. And y'all remember this whole authority thing. I know some of us would choose to forget that, but that's what was going on at the time, all 11 years prior. With me being an old school head, there's a lot of things I miss. I remember the Titantron back in the day on Raw. Remember the Titantron videos when the wrestlers came out? You would see videos and all types of assorted clips from the wrestlers. Y'all remember how awesome those Titantron videos used to be, and we just don't see them no more? I looked at a video from another content creator. I can't think of his name, but he said that the reason why we don't see those Titantron videos anymore is because the person who was in charge of that, they left and they didn't refill the position, which is kind of disappointing, because I would take the Titantron videos over the CGI effects any day. Again, that's just the old school in me. And I think all of us will agree with this. The advertisements. It is so cringeworthy seeing so many advertisements doing Raw, doing SmackDown, definitely doing the pay-per-views. And yes, I'm old school. I still say pay-per-view. I don't say PLE or premium live event. That's just me. But again, the advertisements and the constant showing of them is nerve-wracking. And then on Raw, that dark black ring mat, I can't stand it. On SmackDown, that dark blue ring mat, I can't stand that either. I know those are cosmetic changes, but they're visual changes nonetheless. I prefer the simple light blue mat that we used to see way back in the day. Speaking of which, stuff that I can't stand, let's go back to Triple H, because that's who this video is about. Doesn't it get on your nerves when ever since he ascended to this position, it's like he can't stay away from TV? We know the guy can't wrestle anymore, but anytime there's a presentation, he has to be there. To start the show, he has to be there. When there's a new champion crown, he has to be there. He also has to take a picture with the wrestlers in the back. And I'm like, dude, we get it already. And it just never occurred to me until he ascended to this position that his ego is the size of Texas, probably even bigger than that. Like, dude, we get it already. Did Vince McMahon make his presence felt when it came to certain things? Yes, but not on that level. He now has his name on the executive producer credit, but way back then, we did not need credits. The only time that we saw credits back in the day was when the Saturday Night's Main Event was going off. We would see Vince McMahon name, and I believe his name was Dick Ebersol. That was the only time we saw credits. We didn't see credits at the end of Raw or SmackDown or Sunday Night Heat or any of the pay-per-views because we didn't need to see the credits. So just to see this dude assert himself like that, I mean, the ego is just large with a capital L. And also, let me make this point before I continue on. The WWE's roster in its current form is not stacked. It hasn't been stacked in years, and I would challenge anybody, whether you're a longtime wrestling fan or you just getting into wrestling, take a look at the roster of today and compare that to the roster back in 2002 or 2003 or 2004. You tell me which roster is more stacked, especially in terms of sheer star power. The next point, wrestling is not in a boom period. The last time wrestling was in anything resembling a boom period was during the Monday Night War. When WrestleMania 17 went off the air, even though that was not the official end of the Attitude Era, that's when the boom period ended, right there. We haven't been in the boom period since. The notion that because Triple H is in this position and that there's a large variety of wrestling content out there for availability does not mean that wrestling is in a boom period. Another point that I want to make is that the only reason why I'm still watching today is because there are a few wrestlers I like. I like Roman Reigns, even though I wasn't a fan of his booking at first, but when the Tribal Chief thing took shape, that's when he grew on me. I like CM Punk. I like Seth Rollins. I like Rey Mysterio. I like AJ Styles, just to name a few. So if those cats weren't there, oh yeah, I like John Cena, I like Randy Orton, I like Cody Rhodes. So simply put, if those cats weren't there, I would not be watching right now. I'd still be more than content with my classic collection of stuff that I own. The last thing that I want to mention, going back to Triple H, is the trolling. We're going to come back to that. Y'all remember what he said after the Elimination Chamber? Does it feel like it's WrestleMania season yet? And I was like, who does this guy think he is? Let me tell you something. The John Cena heel turn did not make it seem like it was WrestleMania season. And I like John Cena, but that heel turn should not have happened. It was way too late. Y'all think Vince McMahon would have approved a John Cena heel turn? I think not. That heel turn, I think as time goes on, it probably is going to be remembered for good reasons and for not so good reasons. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking that that heel turn is on the level of Hulk Hogan's heel turn at Bash at the Beach 1996, in which next year is going to mark 30 years since that took place. We still talking about the Hogan heel turn. I doubt anybody is going to be talking about the John Cena heel turn a year from now. I just don't see it. And then it don't stop there. I'll say WrestleMania 41 was not the worst WrestleMania I've ever seen. It had some good matches, but it clearly was not the best. The build-up was the worst we've ever seen. I think that's universal at this point in terms of that line of thinking. Then you had Triple H going into the Hall of Fame. I'll admit the guy deserves it, but it seemed like the weekend in its entirety was all dedicated to him. All of the podcasts that he was doing anything but promoting WrestleMania 41. I mean, we all seen it. It's crazy. And then that brings me to the other comments saying that the internet is not real. I mean, come on now. Then don't critique the product. You're not a real fan if you critique the product. And this is the infamous one right here. If you don't like the product, F off. The ego on this guy is just astronomical. It's just insane that you're in this position, but you're talking like that. When you invest a lot of time and energy and money into things, you have the right to criticize just what the hell you're looking at, especially if the intention is to make sure that the product and everything along with it gets better. I don't recall Vince McMahon lashing out like this. If he did, y'all let me know. And again, this is not no praise or worship of Vince McMahon. We just making some points here. I don't recall Vince McMahon lashing out at the fans like that. And yes, there have been a lot of boneheaded decisions that were made when the leadership was under his creative vision. But I don't recall Vince McMahon saying anything like that, on the record or off the record. The only thing close that I could see Vince McMahon saying was something along the lines of, I'm going to tell you what you're going to like and you're going to like it. And I'm doing some brief paraphrasing there. But that's the case. And it's interesting for Triple H or anybody else to be saying this when at the same time, you got ticket prices rising in the midst of a lackluster TV product. Imagine the ego on somebody to tell you, if you don't like it, don't watch, but at the same time, you jacking up prices. And it's not like the product is hot. The product hasn't been hot in years. And for him to say that, it's just so mind-boggling. Yet and still, some people on these YouTube spaces would tell us that we need to let Triple H cook. No, we don't. We need to let things play out. No, we don't. We don't got to do a damn thing. We really don't. So, with all this being said, this brings me to my last 3 points. The first point is that Triple H should not be in this role. And I've been saying that from the moment that he started getting creative influence behind the scenes. And to all of my content creators and everyone else, y'all know I've been putting that in the comments for the last few months. He does not need to be in this position. He shouldn't be in this position. What would he be doing? I don't know. Part of me wants to say he would still be affiliated with the company in some way. I don't see him being with AEW. I don't see him being with TNA. I do not see him starting up his own wrestling league. He just should not be in this position. He excelled as a wrestler, but as a creative mind, he has failed. And he has failed miserably. And they need to make some changes, and they need to make some changes soon. They cannot keep this ship going, if you will, with that guy in charge of creative. They just can't do it. This leads me to another point. If not Triple H, who would I like to see in that role? I honestly do not know, but I do have some names in mind. The first name that came to mind is Shawn Michaels. Now, I'm a Shawn Michaels fan. He's my number 1 favorite wrestler of all time. But do we really want another quote-unquote wrestling person in that role? Would Shawn Michaels do good in this position? I don't know. Because word is that he's doing good in NXT. What would the situation be if you promote Shawn Michaels to the head of creative for the main roster, but put Triple H back in that slot at NXT? I don't know how that would work, but it's an interesting thought. Paul Heyman is another name that came to mind, but I'm not sure if he would even excel in that role. Quite frankly, I don't even think he wants that role, because anytime in the past when he's been in a creative role, he's clashed with leadership. But other than that, I'm not sure what a chief content officer Heyman would do for the product on Raw and SmackDown. But it'll be interesting to see. Next, we have Michael Hayes. That's a good name. He's been there for quite a long time. Probably he would do good in that position. There's another name. I believe his name is Brian Gewirtz, who knows The Rock pretty well. That's another name. He did good in the year 2000. Eric Bischoff, that name came to mind. No, I would not put Eric Bischoff in a creative role. Hell, even Vince Russo's name came to mind. I don't think I would put him in that role either. And then, of course, we got the Vince McMahon aspect. I think Vince McMahon, for the most part, is done. No matter how his federal probe turns out, I think that's the end of that era. Would I personally like to see it? Yes. But I think that ship has sailed. And the last thing that I want to ask here as I prepare to close this video, and this is a legit question. Have we entered into an era where having compelling storylines no longer matters? Where the wrestling fans now, they don't care about what's happening in the ring in a sense. All they want to do is sing, chant, and make noise, etc., etc. Is that where we at now? The storylines don't matter? Because I recall a time when not only did you have to have great wrestlers, but the storylines had to be of some type of quality that had you turning in on a week-to-week basis. And if the storyline sucked, then people are not going to watch. And I believe Vince Russo said that about a week or so ago on one of his shows. I'm not sure where things go from here, y'all. Overall, I like Triple H. He did his thing as a wrestler, like I mentioned earlier. He has some classics. Some of them are in my top 10. Does he deserve the Hall of Famer spot? Yes, even with the large ego and him pretty much absorbing all of the weekend for WrestleMania 41 to himself. Yes, but at the same time, in this chief content officer role, he should not be in it. And as long as he keep making comments like this, the internet is not real, and don't critique the product. If you don't like it, F off, and you're not a real fan if you critique the product, it's only going to make things worse for him. Only going to make things worse. You cannot be in a business like wrestling or entertainment in general and not think that people are not going to critique what you're putting out there. Because the fact remains, when you invest time, energy, and money into something, you have every right in the world to critique that product. We critique wrestling, we critique movies, we critique music, we critique TV shows, you name it. You cannot have a world without critique in some form. It does not happen like that. And from here, we're going to go ahead and close the video. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And if you like what you heard and you're ready to become part of Team Discipline, go ahead and hit that like button and drop some comments if you're feeling the content. Let me know your thoughts on Triple H. Let me know your thoughts on who you think should be in the chief content officer role. Let me know if you think it should be a non-wrestling personality and any other wrestling related thoughts. And last but not least, hit that subscribe button along with the bell so you're notified when I drop new videos. And until next time, my people, take care of yourselves and remember, the power of the mind is valuable.